It's that time of year again. Great guitar build-off time. So if you're not sure what the Great Guitar Build-Off is, Crimson Guitars puts this whole thing together, and there are two parts of it. There's the Invitational and there is the official Great Guitar Build-Off. So the Invitational is where Crimson Guitars sent a few content creators like myself and some others their kits, and we just need to make cool guitars out of them, and then they're going to be auctioned off for charity. So check out the link down below where you can actually bid to win this guitar, and all of the proceeds are going to go to charity. And you can also bid on some other guitars, and it's just a really cool cause. So there's a second part to this, the official Great Guitar Build-Off, and that's about you guys. You guys can build guitars and have the chance to win some amazing prizes. So I think this whole thing is really cool, and I had a lot of fun last year doing it. Last year, my jumping off point was a starburst pattern. This year, my jumping off point is these radiator style pickups. I just love how these look. I think they're really cool, and I think the brass is really awesome on it. So I found this brass material that looks like the same material as what's on the pickups, and my goal here is to make the whole body of the guitar kind of look like that radiator style. So I have a sketch here, and anywhere where you see yellow crayon, that's where I want to put the brass. So I think this is going to work out, and I think it's going to look pretty cool. Let's get started. First thing to do is make a template. So I designed a shape on the computer and then brought it into my new favorite toy, the Shaper Origin. So I spoke about this in my previous video. I'm still testing this thing out, but so far it's pretty cool. So the first thing that I wanted to do was to make a center line, just so that I know how to place the template onto the body. To do this, I put a V-groove bit and just made a small little engraving in the center, and then I swapped out to a different bit and then cut out the shape. I brought the template over to the body using that center line that I carved out in the first step to align it correctly. And then I just traced it out with a pencil to see if everything was where I wanted it to be. I'm going to use this template for all of the cutouts, so I want to make sure that everything is marked correctly on it, like where the pickups are and where the neck pocket ends and all of that. To do that, I'm going to use a flush trim bit and drill some holes in those areas where the pickups were. Use the flush trim bit to accurately cut out where everything is. Then I'll put the neck in place and put the bridge in its approximate location as well, so that I know where everything goes. Now, to me, doing it like this was just more exact than taking some measurements. Now, based on all of these locations, I could decide where I want all the cutouts for the brass to go. Not going to lie, that actually took me around 10 or 15 times to get all those lines where I wanted them to be. So then I just took a 1/4 inch drill bit and drilled into all the corners, then took a jigsaw and cleared out all the waste and cleaned it all up until it looked good to me. Now, this whole process actually took me way longer than I thought it was going to take because of figuring out the layout of everything. And the reason why I did it like this was because I thought I wasn't going to get the correct locations for the pickups and everything into my computer to cut all this out on the Origin. So next time when I make a guitar fully from scratch and I have full control over where all the pickups go and everything, I will definitely do more of this setup stuff on the Origin. Next, I needed to drill the holes for the control cavity and selector switch, which required a very large Forstner bit, which means I need to reduce the speed on my drill press. Only problem, the screw holding the motor in place, which enables me to move the belt so I can change the speed, was stuck. Like always, WD-40 brand products to the rescue with WD-40 Specialist Penetrant. This is a fast-acting penetrant that breaks the rust bonds that are causing this to be stuck. Now, you don't need to wait a long time for this to work, but while I wait, check out my cool WD-40 t-shirt. Seriously, how cool is this shirt? And now, for the first time ever, this shirt and a bunch of other WD-40 gear is now available for you to purchase for yourself or for someone you know who has been a longtime fan of the WD-40 brand. Growing up, my dad would use the name WD-40 as a verb. He would say, just WD-40 it. It was always a staple in our home, as I'm sure it was in yours as well. So you can check out the link below to pick up some WD-40 gear to share with all the WD-40 brand enthusiasts in your life. Now the WD-40 Specialist Penetrant had some time to break the rust bonds on this screw, and it easily comes loose. It will also leave behind a protective layer that will prevent any rust from forming again, so I can quickly change the speed of my drill press in the future without any problems. Awesome. So I lowered the belt on the pulleys to a lower speed, and now that large Forstner bit can cut through the material really easily. For the control cavity, I just needed to make it larger by connecting the 2 holes I drilled out with a jigsaw. Cool. I placed the template on the body blank, traced it out with a pencil, and cut it to rough shape on the bandsaw. Okay, so my plan is to sandwich the brass between 2 layers of wood on the body, so I needed to resaw the top off. My bandsaw isn't tall enough for the width of this body, so I thought that I could follow the curve to force it to fit, but I started to notice that the blade was going off of my line. So just to be careful, I finished the rest of the cut with a handsaw and then sanded the body flat. So my original plan was to send this through the planer after I resawed the top off, but I tried to do it on the top first and completely ruined it. So this is too wide for my planer, but sometimes I send things a little bit wider than my planer can manage, and it just leaves like 2 little slivers of wood that I'll use a hand plane to clean off, no big deal. But this is even wider than that. So totally my fault that I didn't measure, that I didn't do a test run through it. But it just like ate up at the corners over here because there's these 2 like metal bars sticking out at the bottom, and it just completely chewed through the wood. So I can potentially try to fix this, but instead I glued up another panel of ash that I'm going to use as the top instead. I literally had just enough ash to make this top. It's really annoying that I couldn't use the original top, but glad I was able to figure out a way to make this work. So I traced out the shape, rough cut it at the bandsaw, and set that aside while I worked on the body a bit more. All those cutouts I made in the template are going to be areas on the guitar that will be hollowed out or chambered, and then covered up with the brass. This helps with relieving some of the weight of this large solid body, but I'm curious to see how it will affect the tone. I really just don't know. So I roughly hollowed out the material with a Forstner bit at the drill press, then cleaned it all up with a router. I did this in a few stages. First, I used a guide bushing in my router plunge base with the largest bit that I could get in there to get rid of the bulk of the waste by taking multiple shallow passes. This leaves small amounts of material left over because of the gap between the bushing and the bit. Then I swapped to a pattern bit to clean up the rest of the waste right up to the edge of the template. I kept plunging until the back or the bottom of those chambered areas were about a 1/4 inch thick. I only have a 1/2 inch pattern bit, so I couldn't get into the corners, which are a 1/4 inch. So I used a 1/4 inch straight bit and lowered it so that the shank is in line with the template. And the shank acts as a guide bushing of sorts to clean up all those smaller 1/4 inch areas. Okay, cool. Moving on to the control cavities. The selector switch is easy to mark out for where to drill the hole, but I didn't like the control cavity that I made on the template. It was too wide and it was also askew a little bit, so I just marked the length of it and redrew it directly on the body and got to drilling. I'm really happy that I was able to lower my drill press speed for this operation. These holes go all the way through the back of the body, and I just need to connect the 2 holes for the control cavity and clean that up at the Benchtop Sander. Now, to connect all these cavities for the wiring, I was going to use a couple of fences for my router, but then I remembered that I have a magic tool that can cut any shape that I need. So I designed a rectangle directly on the origin itself, placed it where I wanted it on the body, followed the lines like I was playing a video game, and boom, perfect channel to connect all the wiring through the cavities. Back to the top, I used double-sided tape to place the template on the center line and drilled out the holes where the brass and the pickups are going to go, making sure not to drill into the control cavity parts on the template. That's why I colored them in red. This time I could use a flush trim bit at the router table to clean up all those voids and to make the outside flush to the template. For those inner 1/4 inch parts of the opening, this time I do have a 1/4 inch flush trim bit with the bearing at the tip of the bit, so I could use that to get into all those tighter areas. I could have just used this bit from the start instead of needing to swap it out, but you know, that hindsight thing. Next up, I need to make the covers for the control cavities, but first I need to make a little recess so that those covers can sit flush. So there's a few ways that I thought to do this. One, I'm going to use a rabbiting bit and I'll just make a little recess. Second, I'll use the origin again and I'll create a perfect shape. And for those actual covers, I felt a little bit guilty that I wasted that top that got messed up in the planer. So I ripped it in half and then planed it to thickness, and I'll use these pieces to make those covers, and that way the grain is also going to match really well on the covers. Really glad that I was able to find a use for that mess up. So for the rabbiting bit, I lowered it so that the cutters were at the thickness of the material that I planed up, and just rotated the body around the hole. I could do the same for the control cavity, but I wanted to play more with the on-tool design feature of the origin. So I created the shape I wanted on the tool itself and cut it out. Then I used the on-tool design feature again to make the actual covers. Super satisfying fit. And now for those brass inlays, I guess we can call it. I roughly traced out all the openings I cut into the guitar using my finger as a guide for consistency, and then set my router so the bit was poking out a teeny tiny amount, which was the thickness of the brass material. And I tried my best to follow those lines that I just roughed out, but this is all going to be covered up, so it really doesn't need to be perfect at all. I did, however, want to get the shapes of the brass to be as perfect as I could get them. So I used the old rub pencil on a piece of paper trick to get the outline on all the shapes so that I could cut them out. And I used those as a guide to mark out the brass with a Sharpie. Notice all the pieces of paper have a straight line going up and down. This was so that the whole pattern on the brass will be consistent and in the same orientation on the whole guitar. I then used these electric shears to roughly cut out the shapes, but this can also be done with old school shears and probably the bandsaw as well. I just needed to sand them to their final shape at the Benchtop Sander, and they are looking good. I won't be able to sand the insides of these holes in the top once it's all glued together, so I did some detail work before the glue up. I added a very small round over and then sanded it all smooth. Then I sanded the brass clean, finishing it off with some steel wool, and it's all ready to be glued up. I used CA glue on the channels that I routed out, put the brass in place, and then used some accelerator spray so that it stays in place really quickly. Now, I didn't want the top to slide around, so I set my brad nailer to shoot a brad where the head is still poking out, and then I could just clip off the head. Then I placed the top on without any glue, just to get it perfectly aligned, and then I pressed it down onto those brads. Now, finally, I can put some wood glue all over the whole body, and I also put some CA glue on top of the brass areas, placed the top so that it went into those holes from the brads from earlier, and clamped it all up. I used an old guitar body template as a caul for the whole thing, and just to add some extra pressure in the middle, I added a 2x4 growing across the whole length with a small skinny little scrap at the center of it, which will press down on the center of the body where none of my clamps can reach. Am I missing a spot? Yes, I am actually. Okay. I actually don't have time to work on this today, but I just need to take it out of the clamps because I can't stop thinking about it. Honestly, I was so nervous with how this was going to turn out. Please be good. Okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, oh man. Oh, so worried. Okay. All right, so I already flushed up the top of the guitar earlier, so I can use that as a guide to clean up the rest of it with the flush trim bit at the router table. Always satisfying to do this part. I purposefully didn't route out the whole neck pocket on the main template and the top here, so I can get the back of the body to shape like this. And now I don't need that part anymore, so I can open up the neck pocket. So I cut it open with the handsaw and I started to clean it up with a chisel until I had a better idea. Oh, wait. I had cut this in half when I made the control cavity covers, but I can use it on one side and then flip it and then use it on the other side to get the accurate lines for the neck pocket. All right, cool. I just used some double-sided tape on one side, made sure that everything was really aligned, and flushed it up. Repeat on the other side. Obviously, this would have been better if I didn't cut it in half, but I did. So yeah. Anyway, it worked. Since I reduced the thickness so much when I cut off the top initially, I needed to route out the neck pocket just a little bit deeper, which was really easy to do with a pattern bit, but it was definitely more stable with my 6-in-1 trim router jig base. Once I got that depth right, I used a large roundover bit on all the edges, which in my opinion totally transforms the shape. And then I carved a little extra areas out for more comfortable playing at the higher frets and for your strumming arm, and I sanded and shaved all those areas until they felt right to me. Now we begin a segment called Watch Tamar Drill a Bunch of Holes. I drilled holes for the control knobs and then used the template as a guide for where to drill a hole for the selector switch. Then I drilled a hole for the jack by first drilling a small pilot hole to help guide the large Forstner bit into the control cavity. Then I put the neck in place so I can put the bridge in place to mark out the holes for the strings to go through the body, and drilled those holes out going all the way through the body. Then using those holes as a guide, I drilled bigger holes on the back for the ferrules that are going to hold the strings. Then I drilled a hole under the bridge into the pickup cavity that will be for a wire to ground the bridge. Then I placed the neck ferrules in the neck pocket to get a good layout for them, marked out their centers, and you guessed it, drilled out some more holes going all the way through the back. Then I used those holes to drill out the holes for the neck mounting ferrules that will go in the back. And this concludes the Watch Tamar Drill a Bunch of Holes segment. On to the headstock. I drew out a shape that looked good to me, roughed it out in the bandsaw, and cleaned it up with lots and lots of sanding. I considered using brass here as well, but I like simple headstocks. Then I sanded and cleaned up the body for what felt like days and started the finishing process. To stain it black, I decided to go with leather dye. I've seen a bunch of YouTube videos on using leather dye to stain guitars, and I just wanted to try it out. I worked in sections because it started to dry out pretty quickly, which would leave a harsh line if too much dye was left on it. But it could easily be blended away by going over it again with a dye-soaked rag. So overall, it was pretty easy to work with, and I think it looks pretty killer. The only hard areas were inside the cutouts. I was trying to avoid getting any dye on the brass, but then I realized it was easier if I just went all willy-nilly and applied it on the wood where I needed it, even if that meant getting the dye in the brass, because the dye cleaned up really easily off the brass with some nail polish remover, which is just acetone. And the acetone removed any of the CA glue that got on the brass during the glue-up process as well, so there was a win-win there. One last thing before the wiring. I didn't like how the heel on the neck was popping out, so I followed the curve that was on the top of the body, shaped it using a Kutzall Rasp, and sanded it until it felt nice. I also sanded the whole neck to like 400 grit, nice and smooth. All right, on to the wiring. I used the existing holes in the body to create a holder for the pots while I soldered. Now, I've done this a few times now, and it's getting easier and easier every time. But this is still really out of my comfort zone. The wiring diagrams from Seymour Duncan are so helpful in figuring all of this out. And there are a ton of other great videos on wiring up guitars, even some by my competitors in this competition. So you should definitely go check out those videos, and also definitely check out all the other builds that are going on in this competition. Everything that I've seen so far has been amazing. It's really incredible to see everyone's work. All right, the stain on the body is dry, time to add the finish. I put on a couple of coats of Tru-Oil, a finish that I've used in the past on my guitars, and I've always been very happy with it. I was a little bit worried that the black was going to rub off, but it stayed on really well. I put my logo on the headstock, almost messing it up completely, and then did an oil finish on the neck as well and set those off to dry overnight. Next day, I can finish up all the final details, like shielding the cavities with copper foil and drilling out the holes for the control covers. Totally something that I should have done before finishing, but oh well. I was originally going to stain these covers black to match the body, but I thought the contrast looked really cool here, and it's kind of a nice ode to the original wood. I don't know, I think it looks cool. Moving on, I banged the string ferrules in place and then worked on getting the neck in place. The holes I drilled in the body for the neck ferrules were smaller than the screws that I'm going to use. They were just there to guide the Forstner bit. So I widened those holes to the correct size, going all the way through the neck. Well, not all the way through, but just enough. Then I removed the neck and made the holes on the body slightly larger than the screws that I'm going to use. Placed one in the back to make sure that the screws aren't going to go through the fretboard. Good to go. Then made sure that the holes in the neck are at the correct depth. And finally, time to attach the neck with the ferrules and the screws. Yeah. Now, just a note on the hardware. So I chose to use this gold hardware, and I'm going to use that for the bridge and all the knobs and everything. And this was actually a struggle for me. I originally was going to do chrome or silver color because I'm normally not a fan of gold hardware, but I kind of think it really works here with this whole design. It goes with the brass, but also doesn't go with the brass. I'm just gonna go with it. I like this. I also asked on Instagram what people preferred, and there was a majority rules. People like the gold better, so it's what I'm going with. I know gold isn't for everyone, but I think it just works here. Now, this whole part probably should have been in the Watch Tomorrow Drill a Bunch of Holes segment, but basically here I just drilled out some holes so that I could attach the bridge. Finally, time to hook up the pickups. Not gonna lie, this wasn't easy for me. I mean, it was easy. The soldering part, I get, and I can follow the directions from Seymour Duncan, but I just quadruple check myself more than I usually do because I'm just really scared to screw this up. After getting everything hooked up, I screwed the bridge in place and then the pickup rings, and almost forgot about the tuning pegs. These are locking tuners, and it's the first time that I'm using them. They seem pretty cool. I tightened all the nuts and screwed on the cover plates, put on all the knobs, screwed in the jack, and finally the strap buttons. There are so many little details on guitar builds and so many steps and things to consider. Putting on the strings is probably one of my most favorite things in the whole world. So much has to happen to get me to this point right here. And it's done. So how'd I do at keeping to my original sketch? I think I did a pretty good job. So this was just so much fun. I love being a part of this great guitar build off. Definitely go check out the other builds, and you can also bid on this guitar to win it. This could be yours. And you could also vote for my guitar. There's also a competition to see who builds the best guitars. So go check out those links. I had a few issues actually this morning with some wiring, but I got it all sorted out and I got everything working nicely, and I messed around with all the intonation and everything. And I'm sure you guys want to hear what it sounds like now. So first I'll just play some stuff just so you can hear the difference between the pickups. now let's play a little Name That Tune. I love this guitar so much. So sad that I'm gonna have to give it away, but it's for a good cause. I had so much fun with this. I'm just thinking about my next guitars now, and I can't wait to get started on those. Thank you guys so much for watching. A huge thank you to WOODCRAFT and WD-40 for sponsoring this video, and I'll see you on the next one. I was just talking for like 20 minutes and my mic isn't even on. Great. Where are my cover plates? Ah, I want to hold this so badly. Okay. Last time I made a guitar, I unwrapped all of the strings, and then I couldn't find the B string for about 6 months. I finally found it after 6 months, which is kind of funny. So I'm going to try to keep them all together now. Again with the bees. They won't leave me alone. It's the carpenter bees this time.